Go ahead and call the May 28th, 2015 Budget Presentation Workshop to order. Are there any announcements need to be made at this time? Since that's on the agenda?
We have none.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and allow the county administrator to go through the budget message, and then we will take citizen comments at that time. And any citizen will have 3 minutes to address the board or the administration on the budget message. And you'll have that time to come forward and state your name and what you'd like to address us about. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Hunsaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. It is with great pleasure that I present the recommended FY16 and planned fiscal year 17 budget. The budget reflects a welcome return of upward growth within our economy. Since 2007, our county has experienced a national trend of recession. Declining property values and substantially lower tax bases presented our local government with great challenges of maintaining service levels with fewer people and resources. I believe we met most of those challenges, and we are ready for a new stage of recovery in Manatee County. Property values are rebounding, and new construction will mean additional revenues to serve our growing community. While the economic recovery is a welcome change from the last 8 years, the effects of the recession continue, and we must remember that budget challenges have not gone away. The board approved a set of funding priorities for this budget during our April 14th budget work session. Those priorities include addressing our government's continued role in health care for the working poor within our community, establishing adequate employee compensation in order to maintain our viable workforce in a competitive marketplace, upholding funding priorities established last year, including upgrading our P25 radio system as a countywide and multi-jurisdictional project, expanding transit routes for Lakewood Ranch and the Alton Parish area, and continued funding for animal services. For the 8th consecutive year, I am not recommending any change to the overall property tax rate. The fiscal year 16 net budget is $550 million, which represents a $20 million increase from the fiscal 15 adopted net budget of $530 million. These budget figures do not yet include Port Manatee, which will be included later stage of this budgeting process. The budget increase is largely attributable to rising ad valorem revenues and, to a lesser extent, charges for services. The recommended budget remains $40.3 million lower than it was in 2007, and property tax revenues are $39.4 million lower than 2007. The budget reflects an estimated increase in taxable values of approximately 9%, or $15.2 million over the current year. On June 1, the Property Appraiser's Office will deliver a preliminary estimate of the July 1 property values. New construction and growth in property values have helped us fund increasing state mandates and critical public safety and capital improvement needs. As you know, Save Our Homes tax exemption caps the annual increase assessment values on homesteaded properties at 3%, or the percentage change in Consumer Price Index. This year, Save Our Homes cap is 0.8%. Total overall millage, including the unincorporated municipal services taxing unit, is unchanged at 7.04350. The unincorporated municipal services tax unit is recommended to remain at 0.6109 mils. Pause there. It's again 0.6109 mils. We'll have more of a discussion of that because I think it is truly interesting when you see the comparative analysis of living in unincorporated Manatee County versus any of the cities in Manatee County, or any of the cities in the surrounding counties, or any of the unincorporated areas of the surrounding counties. It is truly a bargain to live in unincorporated Manatee County. And we'll show you that analysis as we go through this budget process in the next couple of weeks. The general obligation bond established for the county will reach maturity in 2018. The debt service for the GO bond reduces significantly within the fiscal year 16, establishing a recurring excess debt service payment of $2.2 million. My recommendation for fiscal 16 is to place the reduction of millage for the GO bond millage within the general fund millage and use the funds for a needed public safety capital project at the jail for roughly $2.1 million. For fiscal year 17, the funding has been placed within reserves for debt service in anticipation of a potential new general obligation bond issue or other long-term strategy to address critical public safety needs. Let's talk about the growth in revenue. At $185 million, property taxes constitute approximately 1/3 of our overall budget. Charges for services represent $194 million, or 35% of our revenues, largely from utility charges and building fees. Intergovernmental revenues and other taxes represent 9% and 6% of sources of revenues, respectively. As in previous years, the property tax revenues are only a portion of the changes in all revenues and do not correspond directly to all the increases and decreases in the net budget totals. On the funding side, as our county begins to respond to the increased activity within the economy, challenges continue to exist from the time period since 2007. In addition to meeting the board's funding priorities, we have continued to emphasize funding public safety needs to the tune of $149 million, or 27% of the expenses of the net budget. The next largest investments are within the physical environment for $143 million, general government at $74 million, and capital investments at $68 million. The priorities for fiscal 16, again, healthcare. The board has given direction to pursue the continued funding of healthcare programs currently funded by the county. The previous source of funding for the programs with the corpus of was the corpus of the funds received from the sale of Manatee Memorial Hospital and general revenues. However, the corpus is nearly depleted with the current fiscal year of 15. The current expenditures from the corpus are $6,953,479. In order to maintain the current level of funding, the source in my recommended budget will have to be funded largely through non-reoccurring general fund reserves. During the past months, much uncertainty has existed at the state and federal level on matching funds that have historically matched our funds. At the date of this budget message, there have been no decisions promulgated on the state or federal levels. A reserve has been established within the general fund from non-reoccurring reserves in order to have funding available for the next 2 years and will be adjusted within the budget once the state determines its course on major health care issues. Manatee County's population has increased dramatically in recent years. In 2005, census data estimated Manatee's population at 303,000. 10 years later, our population has increased by almost 16%, with 2015 population estimated at 351,746. Though our population has grown by nearly 50,000, our workforce trended the opposite way. Since 2007, the county has decreased departmental budgets by over 25% and reduced the number of employees available to provide service to the taxpayers. A common equivalent used by federal and state and county governments is to define the number of employees by each 1,000 people they serve. By applying this metric, Manatee County employed 5.9 people per 1,000 residents in 2005. With budget cuts and constraints, the same calculation in 2015 yields 4.9 employees per 1,000 residents. By comparing the two trends, the chart, I believe you'll see on this in the message, the chart illustrates the inverse relationship. Due to budget workforce reductions, our county has not been able to provide the same level of service as we were able to provide prior to the recession. Put simply, we continue to do far more with fewer people. Our workforce will not be able to maintain the same level of service as more people move to Manatee County and put additional demands on our government. As the economy expands, a new challenge occurs as competitive compensation returns to the market. Employee retention will continue to be a growing challenge as the market offers higher salaries than we currently have in place. An independent study is underway to evaluate the status of jobs within our organization in comparison to the current employment market. We expect this study will offer recommendations on how to retain the talented workforce within our organization and to ensure Manatee County government remains an employer of choice. The Pay for Performance program implemented in fiscal year 14 has continued to work well within the organization. It provides supervisors at all levels a fair, equitable, and consistent manner to financially reward strong work performance. A total amount equal to 4% of budgeted salaries is held in reserve to fund the compensation increases. Constitutional officers would receive funding for their compensation increases based on the same 4%, but they will choose their own method of distribution to employees. Because of this year's legislative delay, the state has not yet determined employer contribution rates for the Florida retirement system. Because of that uncertainty, FRS rates remain constant in this budget recommendation. Reserves will be adjusted when FRS rates are published. During fiscal year 15, the board approved new investments in our Animal Services Division by increasing funding for operating supplies, medical supplies, and veterinarian fees. Additional funding for one-time non-reoccurring amounts for equipment were also allocated in fiscal year 15. The fiscal year 16 budget continues to fund these reoccurring initiatives at a cost of $286,186. The county is in negotiations with Sarasota County on a combined effort to upgrade our county public safety radio system. The radio system is a critical communication system crossing multi-jurisdictions to provide all Manatee County residents with a necessary system for emergency services. As the initial phases of discovery end for this project, the project will have a 2-year implementation period once approved by both county commissions. The cost of the project for Manatee will be approximately $15 million and will be funded through debt issuance in the late summer of this year. In anticipation of the debt service payments are provided and held in reserve within this proposed budget. During fiscal year 15, the county added 2 new transit routes to provide extended service areas. Route 6 extension provided a link between Gulf Beaches to Lakewood Ranch Boulevard, extending service to East Manatee, which was previously unserved by transit. The second addition, North County Connection Service, established a new fixed route along US 41 connecting Palmetto to the Rabonia community in North Manatee County. The additional service cost of $381,456 are funded through Federal Transit Authority grants with a continued local operating match. The routes have been continued within the recommended budget. In addition to the board's funding priorities, this budget addresses several other points of concern which are listed as desired decision units. The budget places additional emphasis on safety through the funding of maintenance and repair of existing assets. Public Works funding has been increased in the areas of tree trimming and for shell replacement on county roads. Maintenance needs for safety playgrounds have accelerated due to aging equipment. The budget increases the maintenance in areas of our beautiful parks and preserves. Additional funding has been established to provide for technology upgrades in software and systems. In addition, we have experienced an increase in software support fees as we use technology for greater efficiencies. Unless we continue to invest in technology, our government will be left behind as the world moves to simplify and accelerate basic functions. The Southwest Tax Increment Financing District budget has increased to reflect rising property values. Programs have been established in the budget from these increases to provide improvements within the area. Decision units are identified for a business improvement program, a neighborhood improvement program, and a consulting study for the area. I have not recommended adding any new positions in the property tax supported areas of our budget until our county has reached a stronger recovery from the recession. There are 5 new positions within the budget which are supported by impact fees, Southwest TIF fees, inspection fees, and the phosphate severance tax. I'm recommending pay increases totaling an average of 4% for each constitutional office. Each constitutional office has implemented its own allocation percentages based upon pay for performance and market equity adjustments. But in keeping with the theme of this budget, there are no recommended positions for any of these offices. The sheriff's budget maintains the current year's funding, along with a $175,876 increase due to inmate food costs. Beyond the 4% salary increase, I'm also recommending the savings from the GO bond debt be applied to the needed capital improvement at the jail. Since the state has not determined the final rates for the FRS program, allocations will be made later within the budget process once the final rates are announced. The clerk of the circuit court and the supervisor of elections have not asked for additional funds within the FY16 budget request. The property appraiser's budget is recommended to remain at the FY15 levels. In accordance with the Florida statutes, the tax collector's budget is not submitted until August 1st. In recent years, we have set a policy of allowing unspent budget amounts and excess funds to be returned to each constitutional officer at the end of the year. This policy was initiated in years when budgets were being reduced and helped each constitutional officer meet demands. Now that budgets are more sustainable, there should be less reliance on the carryover funds. The recommendation within the FY16 budget abates the process of returning excess funds, which will help us right-size the general fund budget in the FY17 budget proposal. Our capital improvement plan budget continues to provide emphasis on public safety and investment in infrastructure. Due to funding constraints, we do not have the availability to fund all general government capital improvements on a pay-as-you-go basis. The board will be presented details on debt issuance in a work session later this year. General government capital improvements, such as the P25 radio system, the new tax collector's annex and detention center locking door upgrades, are included in this debt issuance. Funding sources for debt issuance for the anticipated issuance is established in this recommended budget. The Parks Master Plan is scheduled for fiscal year 16 to identify a long-term vision for parks and recreational projects in the community. Parks projects have not been identified in this budget, pending the outcome and recommendations of the study. Improvements are included for the Coquina North Boat Ramp and the Fort Hamer Park Boat Ramp and are funded with the budget through grants. Transportation projects continue to focus on the 44th Avenue, which is in the initial stages of a multi-year construction program. Debt issuance will occur for this multi-stage project and is taken into consideration within the budget. The board will be updated on the need for debt issuance in this area, with the debt service to be paid from impact fees from the growth areas. In addition, emphasis on projects at US 301 and Fort Hamer and US 301 at Ellington Gillette Road are scheduled in the upcoming years. The Utility Department issued debt during the current fiscal year, which provided funding for the scheduled projects within the fiscal year 16 budget. Another debt issuance has been built into the board-approved rate structure for fiscal year 17 for the continued upgrades needed to the maintenance of the system. The budget stabilization schedule has played a significant role in assisting our county to thrive during these difficult years. During the time when reoccurring yearly revenues were significantly less than expenses, reserves allowed services to be maintained. While other governments experienced detrimental shortages, which resulted in significant decreases in services to their taxpayers, Manatee has been able to absorb the shortfalls due to years of prudent savings. As we enter the new stage of growth, it is important for Manatee to once again place priority on prudent use of reserves. A growing community's demands on this government must be balanced with financial prudent practices of replenishing reserves. Reserves play a key role in redeveloping our future financial health. Demands will be strong over the next several years to place funding into long-awaited projects. However, replenishment of reserves has to be a priority as well. This budget successfully maintains the board's established policy of maintaining a reserve within major funds, which equals 20% of total operating expenditures for the fund. I have provided this budget message, a summary of the recommended budget, additional charts and graphs showing millage comparison and estimates of taxes to be paid by a typical homeowner, and fund summary report. The commission is set to review the fund summary report on June 3rd. Additional materials, including the decision unit book and capital improvement program, will be provided on that date. The decision unit review is scheduled for June 8th and June 9th. The constitutional officers work session is scheduled for June 10th, and the CIP work session review is scheduled for June 11th. Although the budget is balanced in accordance with the requirements of Florida statutes, reoccurring revenue and reoccurring expenditures are not balanced because of non-reoccurring reserves are still being used to supplant revenue loss during the recession. In addition, there are some important needs which cannot be met within existing resources, including capital items, some of which are recommended to be funded through loans. This budget recommendation is presented in advance of the statutory timetable for the county budget process and is based on an early estimate of property values as they stood on December 31st, 2014. Official certified values from property appraiser will be available on July 1st while the county commission is on recess. County staff will use the July 1 numbers to update the recommended budget so that figures reconcile to the certified values. It is anticipated that only minor adjustments will be required, and by July 15th, staff will use the reconciled figures to produce and make available to the commission and the public an updated budget document that will conform to the statutory requirements and timetable. We provided this version of the budget before the formal start of the budget process in July in order to facilitate review by the commission in consideration of the meeting schedule for June and July. From a practical standpoint, this is a working budget, and staff may be making minor adjustments as better information becomes available until the formal July 15th budget is produced. When the July 15th budget is produced, it will include a summary of any material changes that may have resulted from staff adjustments. On July 30th, a budget work session has been scheduled so that the county commission can review the updated figures and also review flagged items identified in budget work sessions and make the decisions required to set the tentative millage rate that will be noticed to all property owners on the mailed trim notices. In conclusion, the recommended budget addresses the board's top priorities without raising the millage rate for our taxpayers. We have emphasized maintaining the county's existing assets as well as planning for growth infrastructure needs for the future. We are optimistic that the economy has begun to recover on a steady growth pattern. And we need to remain aware of the core functions of our government. In the coming years, we must recommit to investing repairs for our aging infrastructure and needed infrastructure for the future. In addition, we will continue to invest in technology upgrades and investment in retaining the talent of our workforce. Manatee County was able to weather the recession without widespread service or workforce reductions due to our prudent stewardship of funds and the availability to draw down on reserves. As we continue to recover from the recession, we must invest in our existing assets, the safety of our community, and our ability to service Manatee County. Thank you.
Okay. Lots to take in. Commissioner Whitmore.
In the future, I know we have this sitting on our desk as we speak, but I like to highlight as you talk so I can redigest it again. And when you emphasize some things, I'd like to be able to do that if you don't mind in the future. I'm going to mention a few things and kind of like what you just did to us, and then if you could answer if you can. First of all, when we get to it, if you could go through that one slide that had GO bonds on it and explain again exactly what all that is about. I know from talking, but I want it to be made clear. Also, you mentioned the Southwest TIF and that the plans for that as far as a consulting organization for a plan, which is fine, but I'd like you to reiterate that. And also, no new positions except what are paid for by fees, and those are 5 positions. I understand that, so thank you. Then you mentioned overages. In the past, we've always, and to me, if I was constitutional, I would, budget a little bit more because then I know if I didn't spend it, I would get it back. But what you're saying now is, and that's been the practice for a long time. If I'm not understanding you correctly, you're not going to give that back, and I think it's because some of these constitutionals were doing capital things, and that's how they're paying it off, but I don't know. So those are the few things I had questions about.
We take those one at a time?
Yep.
I
Well,
didn't write
now
them
you
all
know what
down.
we just got hit with.
All right, you wanted to know about the
Yeah.
general obligation bond.
This whole slide.
Well, we have some general obligation debt that the voters approved years ago that is maturing. And we're proposing that we take that money and spend it this year on a new, on a project up at the jail. And that next year, the board could entertain another voter referendum for another GO bond issue. And as this existing bond issue matures, we would put another one in its place, and there would be no tax increase to the voters. And we could take care of a long list of projects that we would share with the board that need to be funded in the public safety arena. We've been talking to the sheriff, and we have a list of projects that we have been trying to fund over the years, but it's a long list, and we just, during the recession, we couldn't even get close to funding those and continuing to make the government work. And the sheriff's been very patient and waiting for those projects, but they're very important to him. And we think we could share those with the board, and as one GO bond matures, the other one could be put into place, and it would result in no tax increase to the voters. And we'll take you through that in the coming year, but that would be something we would potentially go to the voters on in 2016. The next question was
TIF, Southwest.
the Southwest TIF. We have the property values in the TIF increased as well as the rest of the county, but not at the same pace as the rest of the county. And we have proposed projects that we'll take you through in the workshops of that would afford the redevelopment of that urban core along the 41 corridor that will deal with neighborhoods and businesses. And you will see that during the visit through the decision units in the coming weeks, and get a sense of how all that will work in our whole effort to redevelop that urban core area.
The overages for the constitutional.
Well, you know, that was a recommendation we made back when the recession started to help ease the downsizing of the budget. It's only been in place since 2008. And now that the budgets are picking up again, if we, and we're not downsizing, we would propose to recommend that they return as statutorily required their unspent money at the end of the year. And that would help us right-size the budget. We would think, based on our estimates, that this budget in the general fund could get out of the weeds, meaning that the revenues would exceed expenses in 2017. We're not there in 2016, but we would be there in 2017 if we get a continued strength in property tax growth and we get the return of unspent money by the constitutionals. We could right-size this budget in 2017.
That was all. Thanks.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, that is not something that standard accounting practices for a local government typically require. I feel comfortable with this recommendation because it's something that we kind of did above and beyond, but it also makes it hard for us to understand what our revenue situation is, which I think is important. I mean, you know, you can't, you know, talk about the budget if we have these funds that are pretty unclear. So that's how I feel, but I just like to hear.
It's a statutorily required item that you fund the constitutional's budget based on their request and your agreements at this stage of the game. And then at the end of the year, if they didn't need it or they didn't spend it, they're required statutorily to return it. What we did outside of that statute is in 2008, to help them, is we turned around and gave it back to them. Well, that's not necessary anymore, because we're not in that downsizing business of asking them to reduce their budgets. So it's a request that we think you could abate that project and go back to requesting the money, meet the statutory requirement of returning the money. And that would help you right-size the budget in 17.
And the reason why I asked that, and the only reason, because I remember the sheriff coming before us, I think he came before us, or I heard it at a function that maybe he was speaking as, but I think it was before us, that we had, I think he came before us, that that the money that returned back was going towards paying a helicopter. So that's, maybe the sheriff or somebody can explain that in the future, but I thought that that's the way that we were trying, a mechanism that we were gonna be able to pay for him to be able to replace that, but
Well, we
that's the only
think
reason
that,
why I asked that.
we think we can put the helicopter in the GEO bond issue proposal for public
Okay.
safety and
All right,
meet that need
good
also.
to know, thanks.
Okay. Accept Commissioner Baugh?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. You know, it's hard to sit up here and have you explain everything, but not have really any paperwork to really look at to get a good understanding. Just a couple of questions that I had was, number one, if you could go over the healthcare, what you were saying about that again. And the other thing that I just wanted you to touch base on for me, I know you said that all employees, including the constitutionals, would receive a 4% increase for their employees, but my concern there is, you know, we were just discussing in a workshop not long ago the compression that we have here in the county and the need to try and hold on to a lot of the employees that we have that are such a big part of what they do here at the county to make us successful. So I'm concerned about that. And are we doing anything? Just go over that with me again. How about that?
Okay.
Please.
First of all, healthcare. We are proposing in this budget, in your reserves, to allocate a portion of your reserves above that 20% requirement in the general fund. That roughly $6 million of that be set aside for healthcare. Just set aside. We don't know what it's for until the state and the federal government get finished with their wrangling. But when they finish, we anticipate there'll be a program of some sort. They will have some rules. And we will have, and it will require us to match somebody's money. Because it always requires some local money match. If we didn't set aside any money and they come up with a program that requires a match and we didn't have any, we wouldn't be able to be eligible for any of this program to help fund that gap for the, what we refer to as the working poor. And so it is just designating a portion of your reserves to be set aside in fiscal year 16 and 17 until we see what they do. What amount we need, we don't know.
And what's the reserve balance? Do we know?
We will know. We will take you through the reserves in the general fund. We won't be impacting your 20% reserve requirement.
I understand.
This is in excess of that. One of the things that I told you about in the last couple of months is we've gone through every major fund. We've looked at the reserve requirement. We've looked at what we used to recall the Budget Stabilization Fund, which was a report summarizing the excess reserves over the 20% in 4 different funds. We propose to talk to you not about the summary of 4 funds, but each of those funds individually and how much money is in each of those funds in excess of the 4% requirement, and how we're moving towards getting right-sized so that the revenues exceed the expenses, and see how much revenue we have in each individual's fund's budget stabilization and how much we think we need to increase that amount so we can withstand the next recession as it comes our way, because there will always be a next one. But we think you're in a prudent position. We think what we're proposing here in this budget will maintain the county's credit rating and will not do any harm to the credit rating. We've had the credit reviewed as part of the utility system review, and the credit markets are still very pleased with the board's management of the public funds. And we don't plan on doing anything that would get remotely close to interfering with that. As it relates to employees, we have a pay-for-performance program that we discussed with you. We propose to continue that pay-for-performance system where the employees, based on their performance, can get somewhere between 0 and a 5% increase based on how they perform. We set aside in this budget any money to deal with that compression business that was created during the recession and even in the years preceding the recession. It's just too big a number to try and tackle. We're looking at, as I indicated, a study that should be available in July. We're scheduling a workshop with the board in August to go over the results of the study about the compensation plan and how our employees stack up against the marketplace. And if any adjustments need to be made at that point in time, we'll talk to you about it.
So, will we have that study before we finalize the budget?
Before you finalize the
obviously?
budget in
That'll be
September.
July, you said, when
Yeah.
that comes in?
The report we expect in July, we'll have the workshop. We have it scheduled on your calendars now for August, and you don't adopt the budget until September.
Good. Good question.
Thank you.
So if I could just follow up again on that and clarify. So there's a 4% amount based on the salaries that we pay today. You're reserving a 4% amount, and that will be distributed not across the board, but in pay performance, or if we have to make adjustments as found by the study. Is that what I'm hearing?
How do you say
No, my recommendation is the 4% is for the pay for performance. Any adjustments as of the study, we'll have to look for how we would implement that at a later date or through existing resources. But I think the 4%, we need that just for the pay for performance.
Okay, so there's no across-the-board raise, because I know this was confusing last year a little bit, and that's what I want to make sure I understand it.
We budget 4% of salaries. We provide that to each constitutional. How they do it in their organization is their business.
Right.
Under the county administrator, we do pay for performance. It's made up of two pieces. One is a market equity adjustment on October 1st, based on how the market has moved, and that takes a portion of that 4%. And then the remaining portion is available for pay for performance, and that is paid out based on evaluations, and that is paid in January.
Okay, so the market adjustment might be an across-the-board? Is that what I'm?
Yes, well, the market equity is paid. If the consultant comes back and says the market's moved by 1.25%, we move all the pay ranges by 1.25%, and everybody moves with it, 1.25%. That comes off the 4%.
Okay.
And whatever's left.
You had mentioned 5%, that's, now you're at
Well,
4.
then you're eligible to receive an increase between 0 and 5%, but you have to average within your department 3.75%. You have to average 3.75%.
So, and that's up to each independent,
Each
individual
every department.
director to make that with the amount of funds that they have available, as I understand it. Okay.
They have to make it work.
Okay. Next up, Commissioner DeSabatino.
A lot of information, and it would have been nice to have it, and I could see what we're going, so it's difficult not seeing it. Couple questions. A couple days ago, I believe the tax collector printed a list of the delinquent tax, and how does that factor in? And can he, I mean, this is kind of a sidebar, it's part of our budget. Maybe he can present us with a plan of trying to recapture that, and historically, how he's been successful and what he's planning to do, and it was a huge, I think, 5-page list.
Oh, in the paper?
Yeah,
Is that what you're talking
yeah, I got it online, so, I was trying to find it, but I couldn't, so I'll forward it on.
And then just to help on that, I had asked some questions too about that, and he will be here as part of the constitutionals, and we will have an opportunity to ask him
Okay.
questions. Is that kind of the thought? Yeah, and if other folks have questions for the,
Right.
Grace, we can ask then.
Okay, and it was mentioned that, and I saw some heads shaking or not, we're still a bargain compared to cities and nearby counties. Do we have that data you can share with us?
Yes.
I didn't,
We'll be
I don't-
sharing
I
that
don't know
with
if I
you.
missed that or not in the slide. The slide with the money with the general obligation bonds, and 15 was less than 16, but then you overcompensated for it on general revenue. Can you let us know at another time what that equates to monetarily with the,
About 2.2 million.
okay, so that was the money that was needed for the jail.
Will you explain that again, Robin? Go ahead, what you just said.
Yeah, I had the
If
same
you go
question.
back to that slide,
Go to the
I don't know
slide
if you
and
can go to
talk
that
through it.
slide.
2.2 million for-
Improvements.
Okay.
See, on geo bonds, .1200.
Whoops. Okay, go
On
through it.
15, 1200, and on 16.02.
Right.
So, but then if you go above, countywide, they flip-flopped
Yes.
to make it the same.
I didn't notice that.
And that affords us the opportunity to take that money and use it for a one-time expenditure up at the jail. There's freezers that are needed at the jail, critically needed up the jail, and they're roughly $2.2 million. And it's a
So-
one-time cost
Right.
at the jail.
So the declining amount refers to the declining balances that are owed?
Yes.
So if we went out for another referendum for the bond, what was it originally, and how long ago, and? so
Oh,
just-
we'll provide you all that information when we
Okay.
get to, we thought we'd talk about debt, the various debt issuances for transportation issues, general government issues, and when we have the CIP discussion.
All right, so that has to go to the taxpayers to ask them if they want to re-up the bonds.
Well, for freezers in the jail, somebody's got to pay
Well,
for it.
wait, I want to make sure this is clear, because we're talking about having, because I was a little confused on this too, $2.2 million in 2016, if we just accept this rearranged order, and that is a one-time revenue. The other projects you're talking about, past that 2.2 million for the jail, would require a bond issuance, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the way I look at this is we're getting some capital improvements proposed at around 2.2 million in 2016 for jail-related expenses.
That's just for the freezers. Then there's other public safety issues
Okay.
that could potentially result, if the board agrees, in going to the voters in 16 and ask them to approve a GO bond issue, and it wouldn't require a tax increase. Because you would have this money that freed up of a already existing bond issue that matures, and you put another one in its place.
Well, and they could see it, if we don't do that, then it would be a tax decrease.
Yes.
Yeah,
Or
but then you don't have the money
to fix
Then you have
the
all
jail.
these,
to fund all the capital
Safety
projects that
issues.
we need.
It will get more into that because this is going to be of interest.
yeah.
Yeah.
People to know what they're, what we're talking about, so there has to be justification for that and a list, and
But we can ask the taxpayers anything. We're not imposing on it ourselves, right? We're asking
Right.
them, right?
Been there, done that, and
yeah, I
Oh,
not how it
I
comes
didn't.
out.
Well, it actually
can
has,
say-
the last one was the first time something didn't pass, because I've been around a long time, and I voted for the jail to be built, and
Right.
many of us did. I just didn't realize we were still paying something, the jail bonds, but, yeah, I mean, for public safety, most people would.
But that's a good point, because that
Yeah.
jail bond was something that was taken on to build a new jail, and then it was retired when then the debt was paid off. I mean,
Right.
that's a way to do it. It isn't a debt forever, it isn't a tax increase forever, but it's to address priorities that we have, and, you know, we're not getting into it in any great detail
Right.
today, but
And
I
the-
think it's good we understand.
And the same thing with bonds going forward, it has a sunset date. It's not forever and a day. It's 10 years or how many years you take the bonds out.
That's true.
I don't have a problem.
Be very specific.
You know, I mean,
So
I understand we
specific,
need
yeah.
the improvements to the jail, and I mean, I agree with that we need to do that. My concern and what I'm hearing so far is we're gonna, you know, how's the public gonna feel, you know, we take $6 million out of our reserves for a health care, which they had already said no to on a sales tax referendum, and then we're gonna hit them with one on the jail instead. I mean, it's,
I don't
that
think that's
concerns me.
true about the 6 million, because that, we've been
We're doing
paying,
now.
yeah, but we've been paying that 6 million and more out of the money that we had, that we don't have anymore. The reality is, I mean, that's, and I would like, since you brought that up, when we start talking about the 6 point, whatever it is, 4 million, whatever it is, compared to what, this idea that Manatee County doesn't have to pay anything for healthcare is somewhat ludicrous in my mind. You look at the other jurisdictions around us, and the fact of the matter is the way the LIP program has worked, we sent that money up so we can get money back, and what I heard is we need to have a revenue source that we can do that again with, because the LIP money is coming back at a reduced rate, but this idea that somehow Manatee County doesn't have to contribute anything on a local basis to healthcare, and we're gonna need a breakdown.
Madam Chair, I in no way implied that we were not supposed to pay anything. I didn't even mean for it to sound that way.
Okay.
I'm just looking at it from the public view. I've never said that we didn't have some responsibility. To what extent is the question, but we'll tackle that at another time. I was just implying that the public could possibly look at it that way.
I appreciate clarifying whatever we can for the public's view, so
I
certainly
still have more.
appreciate that. Commissioner DeSabatino,
Okay.
continue.
Okay, so we are discussing employee retention and our challenges. I just wanted to know that compression, the 4%, you know, is that what the sheriff is requiring, or is that sufficient? Is that sufficient for us in the county as well, when we know we're losing valuable and long-term employees to the marketplace, the private marketplace?
It would be nice to have more, but it is always a balancing act between available money, employees' needs, and protecting the county's credit rating. But at this point in time, you will hear from the departments, you'll hear from the constitutionals, and you'll be able to make the decision about balancing those things as we go through the summer.
Okay, a couple more. The 6.4 healthcare that you're going to put aside, that's a discussion for another day, because we don't have a plan in front of us.
Correct.
So possibly we could pick from column A and column B and not fund the whole 6 million. That's probably where Commissioner Ball was going with this. Because there's some monies that we absolutely have to fund, like the healthcare at the jail and so forth, and DJJ and some other things that we have to fund, so.
Yes.
When we do the fund summaries in transit, could we get data for the routes and the ridership? You know, we added on and extended different routes. Could we get that data?
Sure.
Okay. And so I believe
When
that,
excuse me if I could, each of the departments will be visiting with you on their budgets and their programs. And Mr. Schulhofer and the various programs that he operates will be in front of you. We've allotted each of them an amount of time. Since we've never done this before, we'll see how we can stick to the timeframes. But he will have Mr. Steele here from the transit side, and they'll be prepared to share any data that you need.
okay. Then I believe that you indicated that the estimate is gonna be 20 million more this year than last, is that what I heard?
The overall operating budget is up by $20 million. That's made up of all the funds, the net budget, and that's the utility funds, and that's the tax funds. Property tax revenue is up by 15 million, and we'll take you through how that's
Okay.
allocated.
Okay. The Southwest TIF, any idea how much is going into that? We had 700 last year. What are we putting in this
Heard
year?
last year.
Last year, it was 700,000.
That's more than I thought.
Divide
Remember, all of this is
700, but we
Divide
put
it.
4 in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
four.
Yeah, 4.
We rolled
That's what I
3 back to
thought.
the general fund.
Oh,
The, again, these are all estimates based on an estimated growth in the tax base of 9%. Probably the only thing I'm absolutely sure of today is that 9% is wrong. Because on June 1, you're going to hear from the property appraiser about what his estimate of the July 1 number is, and it will be probably higher or lower than 9%. And we'll adjust accordingly. And then in July 1, the actual number will come out, and we'll have to adjust again for the actual number. But that's the number you'll have to live with in adopting the tax rates at the trim setting on July 30th, and then the final adoption of the budget in September will be based on those July 1 property appraiser numbers. So at this point in time, we have an estimate.
So if we estimate that it'll be 9% over the 700 of last year, but still we might elect not to put the whole amount in.
That's
Depending
a
upon what
board decision. At this
projects.
point,
9%.
we've recommended to put it in. It's roughly $1.3 million.
That's good. Uh-huh. 1.3 million in addition?
Divided, though?
No, not in addition.
Wait a minute.
900
good.
extra.
900
Okay,
extra.
yeah.
There we go.
Okay. I was like,
We're not
wow,
that
getting rich
lucky.
here. Okay. And so out of that TIF, then there'll be, you're gonna shift, you're adding a new person in that? You said?
There's 2 new people.
So those salaries will come out of the TIF?
Yes.
Okay.
Any idea what that equates to? Just,
We'll get you through that
Okay.
next week.
okay. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes, Madam Chair, I want to get more of an understanding. Is the county administrator recommending that the 4% increase in the constitutional officer for this year you're coming up, that's your recommendation?
Yes,
And for the county employees, anywhere from 0 to 5%?
yes,
Does that mean that an employee may not get any increase?
yes.
So an employee be evaluated individually, and you would determine at that point whether that employee is worth increasing from 0 to 5?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So my question is, during that process, is there any kind of way your department heads, or whoever making the decisions, can find out that there's any women that making far less than any male in Manatee County government? I know your department heads, you dictate that for negotiations. So if they're gonna evaluate each employee, certainly if you have someone that have the same qualification, been here longer than a person, maybe a male, that equal pay for women should be looked at the same time. My concern is the presentation that we was given with so many employees that are close to retirement. There may be individuals there that's justifiable that may need more than the 5% based on what they've been making in the past future. I know you gave testimony to us that the department head, Seaford, I believe, for years, his department with the budget was not getting increases, so certainly no one in that department was making more than he was, I imagine. So if we're going to evaluate each employee, determine whether they deserve a raise from 0 to 5, I would like to, for your department heads or whoever you see fit to do so, to make sure that we don't have women in government that's underpaid and more qualified than men, if we're going to take that approach. Since it's not a mandatory, well, give me at least 2% up to 5, So that tells me that we're gonna evaluate every employee. The department heads would do that, the manager would do that. So they may can find someone in there who may not be justifiable being paid. I would like you to consider that.
We, when all of the supervisors and managers and directors complete their work, before we announce to anybody what their salary increase is, the human resource folks take all that data, and as I like to call it, we slice and dice it to make sure that the men don't get bigger raises than the women, that the older folks don't get bigger raises than the younger folks, that we don't have any racial disparity when we're doing raises. And we look at it all different ways to make sure that it's fair and equitable and balanced across the organization. And once we're assured that it's fair and balanced and equitable across the organization, then and only then do we allow people to announce what the raises will be to the employees. We look at that very diligently every year.
And I also was looking at the fact that it may go beyond your term as the county administrator, since most of these issues that I've seen when you was not the county administrator, so I would hate for someone to be here 25 years working that may be a female, and you find out somebody's here 4 years and maybe making more money than that person. I just want to be sure about that because, you know, I always receive phone calls from people. And I just think if you're dealing with every individual in the process that you told that's going to take place, that we be assured that there's not someone left in the cracks.
Well, guess when you hire the next county administrator, you ought to ask them that question.
That's right.
We had to look at the same thing. in
I know, it's-
government
it's-
across the river. We had no as officials, we had no idea that what people's actually making. And there we found out that there was some discrepancies in men versus women. So I'm just putting that on the table. Since we're going to evaluate everyone, I think it should at least be looked at, and you gave me an explanation of that. It would be evaluated. So I don't want someone calling me after the fact, say, look, I'm making X number of dollars, and they got this raise, and I didn't get it. And by the way, I'm making $10,000 less than this person, and I'm more qualified and been here longer.
It's a tough issue in this, when you've got 1,700 employees. Somebody's always gonna feel that the person down the hall shouldn't be making more than them.
Well, but it does happen.
Oh, yeah?
And the courthouse is full up with them across the nation with these low pay wages and things like that and women being discriminated. So if other people are afraid to talk about it, I'm willing to talk about it. I'm just trying to make sure that everyone is treated fairly and equally in county government.
We try diligently, that's all I can say, is we work at it.
Okay, Commissioner Whitmore.
And it's happened to me professionally throughout the years, but it doesn't happen anymore. And if it does, we have checks and balances. I don't think we could afford to go back that somebody's been here 20 years that, and I left a job and made $10,000 more a year just going to another job at another facility doing the same exact thing. So, I mean, I get it, but I don't think fiscally that we can afford. And with the issues that you're talking about, it's more even worse than just budget. But I don't think that happens now, and I'm hoping it doesn't, and we've been assured it doesn't. And I don't think we can go above our, up above the 4% unless we do increase our taxes with our citizens, and I don't think that they'll have that. But again, somebody that's touched personally, I get it, and I appreciate somebody's at least standing up, saying what you have. I do, and I push my button, and I hate to bring it up, but I pushed my button to make a response, so I was waiting. But with the jails, I remember a while back, I think the stoves, the sheriff brought pictures of the kitchen that had to be redone with holes in it. I have friends that, or people that I know here that I've talked to that work at the jail. You got inmates tearing the place up. You've got leaks in the roof and stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff I think you're talking about in the future that will have to come before the citizens. And I don't think as a citizen, because it's our responsibility as a county to maintain the jail. It's not the sheriff's. We could take the jail over tomorrow. He doesn't have to. We pay him to do that. So I know about you, but I have somebody at my house today repairing dry rot on my, on my windows that were built. My house was done 15 years ago and I remodeled. So that's the kind of stuff you got to maintain and for public safety. So again, that's something we'll talk about later, but I think the citizens are smart enough to realize that, or at least we need to be educated that the county's responsibility is to have the jail, and we contract out with the sheriff. We could do it, but we'd still have to have the same repair. So that's something that I hope gets explained a little bit better to the public, and I don't think citizens would have a problem with that. So at least I wouldn't personally. And that's all I have.
And I just want to clarify, it's not an issue
No.
for the budget that we are going to adopt in September.
Correct.
The only issue that we show here is that we are going to be doing a budgeting, the slight decrease in the debt service toward this 2.2 million, and that money will be shown going to improvements at the jail as
Yes.
a one-time expenditure. This whole issue of what's going to be happening in the future is going to have to be more fleshed out when we get to that. Certainly,
and
all of
that's-
us have learned our lesson that we don't want to take any kind of a proposal for increased revenue to the voters without a clear picture of where that money would go. So that will be a challenge, as you're saying, to potentially take on in 2016. There may be other challenges that we have to take on. We don't really know at this point. We're doing we're doing this as the second year of a two-year budget, right?
Yes.
Okay.
No, this is the first
First year of a two-year budget. Okay, that's,
First year.
I want to make sure I get that right.
You're
yeah.
looking at the proposed budget for 16 and our planned budget for 17.
Okay.
You will see both of those in the decision units and
Okay.
recommendations.
Okay, and then I just want to make a comment, then I'll go back to Charles, I know you had a comment. In regards to the healthcare funding, again, it's going to be very important that we do have a breakdown showing the funds that we have to spend, where that money comes from, and then this 6 million, you had said, I wrote this down, keep programs. But that's not for sure. That's a decision that we're going to have to make. We're going to have some public input. I know, I've talked to people.
Yes.
Are bringing recommendations to us. So that doesn't mean we're going to do things the same way we did them last year. It's just the money amount, that we had, that came from, if I remember correctly, that we had left over in the corpus was about 6.4 million. So that's what you're talking about, budgeting from reserves to have kind of this level playing field?
Yes.
Okay. All right, but as to
It's
what
one-
that money will go to, that is up for discussion further.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Charles?
Yes, Madam Chair. I kind of know, I guess I know where Commissioner Barr is coming from. A referendum is a referendum, but, sometimes referendums can be hijacked.
Really?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And it needs to be education explained. Anytime you do any referendum, I don't care what it's for, you got to deal with the issue of how much money involved, what it's actually for. And that need to be explained to the voters and so they understand what we're up against, no matter what the situation is. And so I do understand her concern about that. And I've always said that since I've been a commissioner. Marketing is the tool and the key. And sometimes you have to have these meetings with individuals to make sure they understand what's going on because they have influence to influence thousands of people to vote against something. So her comment is well taken by me.
Okay, Commissioner Baugh.
Two things. Number one, I think I wrote this down, I just want to make sure I have it right. We do expect to increase $20 million. Am I right on that figure? It's going up $20 million from last year.
Across all funds,
All
all
funds.
150 funds.
Okay.
Enterprise accounts too.
And the other thing is, can you just touch base again? And I'm sorry, I hate to have to keep bringing this stuff up, but I don't, I'm trying to go by what you said. Infrastructure, roads. What was that again about roads?
We have a number of road projects we'll be talking to you about that are in the capital improvement program. As you know, the funding for the Fort Hamer Bridge is fully funded with impact fees. The funding for 44th, which includes two bridges, one over the river and one over the interstate, is going to be an expensive endeavor, which will require us to issue debt. And the debt is proposed to be paid for from impact fees in the areas that will benefit from the roadway.
Right, and how about as far as, and you probably have a fund for this, I don't exactly know, I don't quite understand, but how about roads that we have that need repairs? How do we handle that? Is that from the general?
Therein lies a challenge that this county will face going forward that I think I've talked to each of you about. We have money that we spend on new things for new growth through impact fees.
Right,
We don't have money, a dedicated source of money for assets that we currently have to maintain them, those assets. That is a problem in this government because we have to take money from property taxes to maintain existing assets when typically property tax growth, absent of property tax increase, property growth and property taxes usually, typically in governments, are used to fund the growth in the community. As I said, there's 50,000 more people in this county than there were in 2005, and those 50,000 people want the same services that everybody else has, and you usually fund that with the growth in the tax base. And thus, you have a challenge of funding the same level of service and fund the repair of existing assets. The other counties up and down the state will have a dedicated revenue sources. You're going to get to this discussion, and I might as well say it. The school board has a half-cent sales tax to keep maintaining existing schools. They're going back for a school impact fee to build the new schools. We have impact fees to build new roads. We don't have a half-cent sales tax to maintain existing roads. That's the challenge. We don't have a half-cent sales tax to maintain. 15 years ago, we built a lot of parks with impact fees. How do we maintain the swing sets, the playground equipment, the other assets that are in those parks? It's a challenge that we face, and we struggle with that. And you will see in the budget the continuing struggle that Charlie Bishop and Charlie Henziker will talk to you about. How do you maintain those? We have, in this budget, proposed to use some of the reserves in the general fund to maintain parks equipment. But that's using your reserves to maintain that. You can't continue to do that because you have a limited amount of reserves. But on an ongoing basis, thinking out 5, 10, 15 years, how are we going to do that? We'll need to come up with a plan.
thank you, Ed.
Okay, Commissioner DiSabatino.
I know Nick always has his finger on the pulse of what's going on in Tallahassee. Do you foresee any other unfunded mandates coming down to us that aren't factored into this budget?
I don't think so.
Well, let's just say the answer to the question is probably yes. Which ones? There's always something out there that's going to come our way.
Careful what you ask for.
They haven't done their budget yet, so we don't
Yeah.
know.
Hold on. When they finish that, we'll know.
So,
Now-
The challenge we're going to have here is usually they're finished by the time we have these budget discussions.
right,
Now, we're going to have these budget discussions before they finish.
Yeah.
So you
Right.
could be in for quite a surprise when we come back in July and figure out,
that might affect things, but we don't set the final before that, right?
Right,
right,
Okay.
yeah. The
We
July
just set the
30th meeting
absolute
could be a
high.
long day and night.
but we may have to slash and burn.
Interesting that you brought up dedicated revenue, because I'm hearing, on the street that it's no surprise that infrastructure and roads, sidewalks, streetlights are very important to people, their quality of life, in addition to the parks and other things. And it's been brought up, asking the taxpayers if they wanted for infrastructure.
Well, it's, yeah, and I repeat, there's 50,000 more people in the county since 2005. When do we build a library? Or do we think we've got all the libraries we're ever going to need? That's what infrastructure sales tax is about in other communities. It's maintaining existing assets and building new. But at some point in time, the people on the east side of 75 are going to say, we'd kind of like a library out here.
I think we'll just do it ourselves. No sales
But-
tax increase.
The 6 people on this board just promised me, if you ever have a referendum, it's on a scheduled election time. No special, please.
We didn't promise.
You didn't promise?
I'm not making anything
No, I'm
like that.
asking you now, no
Oh.
special asking for this, because
18. You could wait and do it in 18.
you could.
No,
There's,
I don't.
We're gonna do it.
Okay, well, I don't think we're going to make any promises. Your point is well taken.
Yeah,
It's very unpopular, we get that. I just want to follow up on this issue because I think it'll be confusing to people, and we want to make it clear. We talk about growth in property tax revenues and how typically that money might pay for growth in infrastructure. But that's not been our case. We've not paid for roads with property taxes.
No.
Correct?
correct.
Okay. And in fact, if you look at a TIF is a way to capture the increase and pay for some of the existing deficiencies.
Right.
Right.
Which impact fees, of course, cannot pay for.
Correct.
So the TIF, we're looking at retrofitting some of our existing urban areas that are short that infrastructure. So it's important for people to understand that even though we do have this growth, that we, the county, has not had an infrastructure surtax to pay for additional roads. They've been paid for by impact fees. But there are some challenges there, as we know, and we're doing an impact fee study, right?
Correct.
When does that impact fee study get started?
It will be completed by the end of this year. And we are looking at whether it's an impact fee or a mobility fee or a fee by some other name.
Okay, but to get a revenue source, and we're gonna have some recommendations, and that's another big discussion, but.
Yes.
But you had mentioned public works, road maintenance, parks maintenance, and technology. Is that going to be funded out of this increase in revenue? You said only reserves, so I was a little bit confused.
We'll take you through that. Some of the increases are funded with the growth. Others are funded from reserves, and we'll be real specific when we take you through this, which ones are coming from one-time monies.
Yeah, because I mean, I think it's a reasonable question.
Yeah.
People say, oh, you're going to have a $20 million increase in budget. Exactly what is that going towards?
Yes, we will
We're
have.
going to have to be able to answer
We will
that
have a very detailed explanation. Again, some of that $20 million is the utility system. That's only utility customers, and that will be used to maintain the utility system. So it's all those different funds when you talk the $20 million. The property tax revenue is the $15 million number.
Okay.
And what did that go for?
Okay.
Can I dialogue on that? But we are still drawing down from reserves. How much
Yes.
were we going to draw down
12?
to compensate, to balance the budget? 14?
No, 12, I think.
Oh, we'll get through the details of that
So
next week, of
it's
how much
not-
drop by fund, because you have 4 funds.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the general fund, you've got the transportation trust fund, you've got the MSTU, and the library fund, the municipal services taxing unit.
One more question.
That's a statutory term. I usually call that the unincorporated general fund.
So even though we might have 15 in the general fund,
That's 15 million in property tax revenue across all 4 of those funds.
okay. But that's not that has to be offset by what we were gonna draw down from reserves.
Yes.
Just like your passport, we're still taking money out of your passport account.
Yes,
So you could be putting money in, but you're just taking more out.
yes. We are still spending more than that.
Exactly.
Commissioner Smith?
Yes, Madam Chair. Since we're talking about infrastructure, and one of the biggest things that I find myself dealing with as a county commissioner is the fact that when a residents, tell me that, I've been here 20, 25 years, and my house is worth $150,000, $160,000. I'm still have a ditch, no sidewalks. Paying something into the tax base, nothing is returned. The biggest issue that I see with infrastructure is these homes and people been here for 20, 25 years, 30 years, who still don't have a sidewalk. That's a major issue when you don't see the sidewalk improvements and children walking in the street. The ditch is full of mosquitoes. I mean, you can go Memphis area all through there. Its park is fine, but the $28 million that you mentioned, we got to really understand where that's going. So what do I tell my constituents, the fact of that your goal of getting a sidewalk and lighting is so dark over there? We have to have a serious conversation to deal with those issues. The community cannot remain the same, or you're going to get the same results. And so there's nothing to grab in these areas that do not have even a sidewalk, ditches on both sides of the road. And so there needs to be a comprehensive plan. I know people are moving here. We want them to move here. We want them to increase the tax base. But, what about the folks who built Manatee County, who's been here for many years, who want a sidewalk and decent sidewalks where the children can walk in, out of the road? It hurts me. Ride around and see how deep the ditches are, 2 to 3 feet.
Yeah, and
And so no sidewalk. I mean, it's amazed me, the fact that there's no sidewalks. I'll be honest with you, a county this size.
And that's a reality of the way things used to be built. I mean, the subdivision that I live in has no sidewalks, has open ditches, no lighting. I mean, it's just the way things were built back in the day, before we had regulations. People came to Florida and built things somewhat on the cheap. And now we're having to deal with that problem. We don't budget money for those things unless I'm mistaken. Maybe you could address?
I had breakfast this morning with a gentleman that brought that same question up. I believe his house would sell in excess of $500,000. But he says his wife wants to understand how come they can't get a sidewalk and streetlights.
You can if you
But
pay for
those
it.
are neighborhoods that were built before those things were required.
Right.
And they don't have a curb, and they don't have a sidewalk, and they're afraid in the winter to take the dog out for a walk.
Disappear.
But how can we help them get their neighbors together and get a plan to get sidewalks that's just the way those rules were established in those days. Buy a piece of dirt, build a house. Oh, we don't have a sidewalk. We got a swale. Because we have a swale, we can't have a sidewalk. Yeah, it's a challenge. And that's part of the reason we're looking at this redeveloping of the urban core, is how do we fix that? And how do we take that challenge on to deal with the older neighborhoods?
Mr. DiSabatino.
But the dilemma that I've been encountering to be on the opposite side of Commissioner Smith, you hear from those folks that want the sidewalks and the streetlights, but then you ask their neighbor and they don't.
Right.
So then you're trying to help them, and half the neighbors don't want it. They don't want you to take their property. They don't want you to take their right of way. And so you're in a quandary, and then if you ask the neighbors and you need 67%, it's hard to get 67% of people to agree on anything. So that's
Well,
what
that
happens.
won't be in my neighborhood, because we're dealing with the element of crime in our neighborhoods. And the bottom line is that when you get CDBG funds and all these federal money, you should uplift the community, because you can make an argument that you can't continue to put money in those communities other government ways if you don't need sidewalks. I mean, things have to get better. In my community, you won't have anyone saying we don't need sidewalks at all. Not about Mount Raymond, those areas over there where people at night selling dope. They want lights and they want sidewalks. Children are walking in the middle of the road. And that's the responsibility of government. City governments across this county have made to make sidewalks throughout the cities. It's easy for people to walk in Cominga, ride bikes and things like that. So that shouldn't be an issue of county government. It has to be a will to do something and continue the status quo. And so that's what you're going to start seeing people and voters look at, the issue of traffic and the issue of sidewalks, what the quality of life is. Is everything remaining the same? What I'm getting on my tax return when I pay my taxes? What the county administrator mentioned, I hear that all day long as I come out of the churches. It's been this discussion for many years before I got up here. So it can't be the status quo and remain the same. That's considered slum and blight. People come here from other places and say, I can't even believe you don't have a sidewalk. I left here 15 years ago. I mean, so you choose to live in the country. Everybody don't want a sidewalk. If you got 18 acres or 10 acres, they don't want a sidewalk. I'm talking about people who living maybe 15 or 16 to an acre. I just don't know. And some people want sidewalk in the country. But it's an individual thing. But you wouldn't find that issue in District 2, most of it. So, you know, it's just the whole issue that we as public officials have to govern ourselves where we have to do what's right. And I really think the issue of infrastructure is one of the biggest conversations that we need to really discuss. And when we're talking about increases and things like that, my constituents saying basically no money is coming into the community. We can't point to anything but a park or additional deputies. That's what they're telling me, which is a good thing. Ain't nothing wrong with that. So what do I tell them? They're already paying taxes.
It's a budget issue. We don't have an unlimited amount of funds. We have a limited amount of funds, and we have to make the tough decisions. We're just in the beginning. We're going to hear from our constituents. But, you know, we don't make money here. We spend tax dollars that come in, and we have to make good decisions about where those tax dollars are going. And the things you're talking about have not traditionally been funded. We have not traditionally been funding out of our general ad valorem revenues, and jump in and tell me if I'm wrong, things like new sidewalks, new lighting. You know, we've been having a discussion on the MPO about how to get lighting on University Parkway. There's a guy that comes almost to every single one of our meetings. And we're all like, we kept trying to get the state to pay for it. The state kept telling us, no, 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 it's not a safety issue. They will not pay for it. So the only way that that's really going to be paid for is if the property owners vote to, you know, create a district for lighting.
Well, I'm asking for one, and we'll go there later with the county administrator, but you're correct. But the facts is that we as elected officials the TIF is fine, which is great. We got to have a plan crossing these urban corridors, across the whole, a plan. Your enterprise zone board is gone north of the river. It's going to sunset December, so there's nothing at all. Of course you need a special tax district to get these infrastructures, but you got to have a serious urban development plan crossing these target areas that mandate law enforcement and more increased law enforcement in those areas. And in fact, more lighting will protect law enforcement. Sidewalks will protect law enforcement. So those are the issues that we did. The deputy got a call by somebody walking in the street. He said, "Where's no sidewalk?"
Yeah.
You know, so those are the little things I'm talking about.
Okay.
And we're also working on a prototype for MSTUs down in Bayshore. We have as a list of priorities of different streets, and perhaps Commissioner Smith can work on a list up in his area that he's talking about, and at least have it available when and exactly how much we're talking about. That way we can maybe put a number on an issue.
Remember a while back today, I mentioned the fact 0.6 mils. There's a price that goes along with how inexpensive it is to live in the unincorporated portion of the county. It's half the cost, less than half the cost of surrounding communities. And the price is, you just don't have the money to do what other places do because it's 0.6 mils. It's over 5 mils to live in unincorporated Hillsborough County. And we're at 0.6,
Wow, over 5?
over 5.
Whoa.
Wow, what do they get for their money?
Same thing.
Sidewalks and
They get more.
lights, probably.
They get more.
Pay the
Commissioner-
police some more.
Commissioner Baugh? You've been patient. Yeah, wrap it up for us.
You know what, I think that everything I've heard has been really important issues. And Commissioner Smith, I do sympathize with what you're saying. I understand exactly where you're coming from. But I have to tell you, it's all over the county that we have those issues. And we do need to start thinking about it. Betsy, you brought up a good point. Traditionally, we have not paid for those things. Well, tradition's always made to be changed. You know, I didn't get elected to keep doing the same thing that everybody else has been doing. I mean, I wanted to improve the quality of life for the residents in Manatee. And Ed brought up, you know, we are growing leaps and bounds. I see homes being approved by this board in North County on roads that are not even to the standard that we do today when we build a new road. Talking about kids being out on the street for a school bus stop with deep ditches on the roads, no place for the kids to really stand. So, you know, these are issues that we do need to address. We need to come up with a plan. And I understand that we traditionally, and that was a good way, Betsy, to put it, that we've not paid for these things. But we've got to start looking at priorities. And it is time that we start looking to see how, and we talk about it with the branding of the ULI report. We need to start improving our neighborhoods for the residents of this county because they're moving here and they want a good quality of life, and it's our job to make sure they have it. So I got to tell you, I don't know exactly what the answer is, and that's why I'm thankful that we have our county administrator. But I can tell you these are going to be issues that I'm going to be very passionate about. I was passionate up on this dais last week in our meeting, and I think we need to start looking to see what we can do for the residents in all areas of the county. Now, granted, I mean, out in Lakewood Ranch, no, we have sidewalks, we're blessed, we have lights, we pay for them. We have them, yes. But I'm not talking about in District 5 so much. I'm talking about the rest of the county, and we have got to start looking at these things and coming up with some plans. That's why we were elected. That's what we're supposed to do. That's our job.
Okay, Commissioner DiSabatino?
And those are good points, Commissioner Ball. You know, District 5 has the CDDs, but that's extra that the people elect to live there to pay for.
Right.
And it looks beautiful, no doubt. And then you have the funds to pay for your, you know, the beautification out there. I know Commissioner Bustle is very passionate about landscaping our entrances and our,
And Ravonia.
yeah,
I mean,
and just
very important.
all over.
There's no sidewalks.
I'm just curious for a future of, just throwing it out there, I'm not saying we're doing it or not, but what a half cent would equate to money-wise each year.
24
And that way you would know how much a half cent would equate to, that way you would know how much you would have if we're talking about roads and infrastructure.
Referendum? Talking about a half-cent referendum?
Yeah. An infrastructure surtax, which they have, I believe, in Sarasota. Don't they have a penny, I think, in Sarasota for infrastructure, if I remember correctly?
I
There's,
think they're looking at their mobility fee now to do most of
we're the only county on the West Coast without one. And a half cent would be 24 to 25 million.
24, 25 million. Mr.
Just a drop in
Schulhofer
the
would like
bucket.
that to spend on his roads. He's like, pick me, pick me. So, no, thank you.
Okay. Next up, Commissioner Whitmore.
And I was just going to say, all this is nice, but if we raise taxes, of course, we can do a lot of things that we need to do. But since I've been up here, we haven't raised the millage, so, but if you do, that's fine. But, well, it takes money to do what you're talking about, so, and this half-cent tax for whatever you're talking about, it's more taxes, and if that's what the citizens want, fine.
Increase like 20 million this year alone.
And it's gonna go down in another year or so. If you looked at Mr. Hunsaker's projections
Oh,
for
I
the
heard.
stabilization,
I heard everything he said.
he didn't mention this. This was something that he gave us last week. You projected what was it, this percent increase? And then in 2 more years, our property values and everything starts going down again. So he's planning on that. So again, it's fine. I read it. We all got something that I remember looking at it, and I think it was
Was in
the
the workshop.
stabilization, yeah.
Doesn't go down.
remember
the-
seeing
The
that.
rate of increase.
Yeah, but it goes down on the property values of what will be increasing. Everything's gonna settle down. Right now, we're hot right now, like we were, and it's gonna start stabilizing and going down again. So, and I agree. The sidewalks and, the swales that you have are at least 10 or 15 feet, some of them. They scare me. My car would disappear if I landed in one. But, and like Betsy's right, it hasn't been done in the past. We can do it. It's going to take money. Do you know how expensive it is to build a sidewalk and to close in a swale, which we all know what the capital costs are for that. I remember 59th Street West, where Blake Hospital was, those swales were just as deep as they are on Canal Road. And in 75th Street, I remember that years ago used to scare me driving up and down that street. So I get it. Your citizens do have an opportunity to do exactly, I think, what somebody up here mentioned, where they can look at the MSTUs, and if you can get 67% of them to agree to it, a lot of communities are doing that. So there are options, and but it takes money, so we just got to look at all that.
I think that you have 2 MSTUs in District 2, are there 2? Special
do?
taxing districts for lighting and infrastructure, I think you have 2.
You do? Where? Do you know?
District
North
2?
and- Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember seeing them too when we had to set the,
People coming to
The
tell us.
citizens
set the
came
debt
and-
service and the
Oh, that's
amount.
right. We had
Goes
to
up,
change the
sometimes it
rates.
goes
right, I
down.
And the
remember
rates,
that
because it
last
does
year.
go up and down.
At least 2, I think.
That's,
Maybe 3.
and that's the issue. It's a fairness issue. And, and I hear you. And I think this is a good discussion, and this is typically how we do work sessions, just so anybody's looking. We just
We usually
discuss
on the
up here.
fourth
So there's a
floor.
lot of discussion, and I appreciate everybody discussing this, because these are issues that are going to be of importance to our community. How do we look at funding? What kind of decisions do we make? Do we need to have more revenue for this infrastructure? That's a question that, it would take a lot of discussion. You've seen a lot of referendums that have gone down in flames. We weren't the only one to have a referendum go down in flames. Pinellas County had a referendum. Hillsborough County has one coming up. They're trying to create funding mechanisms for things like transit, for roads. It's not just transit, but it's very, very difficult for many people that live here, have lived here for a long time, to say, I'm going to increase, the taxes that I pay, because they feel it's all growth related. The question that I have is, if you look at what some of the people that have been here for a long time, that didn't pay impact fees, that have had a very low tax base, we haven't kept up with our roads, is that factual? Is it really all growth related, or do we have incredible deficiencies since the 50s when this community was started to develop? So that's something that I see as a question. I know I'll probably be hanged for even just saying that, but it is. Okay, I'll stop. Commissioner Baugh?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I want to make it very clear, I in no way was insinuating that we need a tax increase or a sales tax increase of any sort, no millage increase. I can tell you now, I'd be hard pressed to ever vote for that. So that's not what I was talking about at all. And yes, ma'am, I do know how much it cost. I have been working on this for several months. I'm saying that we really need to prioritize and perhaps change our thoughts a little on how we do things, that's all. And like I said, thank God we've got our county administrator, because it's tough, it's difficult.
Well, and that's why it's really important that we know what that increase is going to, because that's what you're talking about. Maybe not paying for the P25, not paying for the transit, shifting that money. That's what we do.
Yeah.
those are the hard decisions you
Where
have
else
to
are we
make.
gonna
We
get
don't
it?
Make it up.
Where else are we gonna get
You
it?
gotta make hard decisions. Okay.
Just, you know,
Mr. Chappie.
on 4/14/15, we gave the priorities to our staff so they could do this budget, and that was the health care, the employee compensation, the P25, little transit expansion, and animal services. So that's the baseline that we gave staff. So we're kind of pigeonholed ourselves for that. And we did that on 4/14/15, so. I mean, we can change anything.
Time between now and
We
September, we
can
can
change,
change.
absolutely, absolutely.
And we're gonna hear from the public, so.
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Unless you guys, something, okay, I was gonna go to the public. Yes, Commissioner.
I support everything that Commissioner Barr has stated. The bottom line is you have to priority the things, and I'm going along with this budget right now this year, but I'm not going to sit here every year and the status quo because we did it this way we did it. That ain't how I got elected. And I got elected for change, especially in those areas I'm talking about, 60 to 70% of the vote in those areas. But I am not going to sit here without thinking out of the box. I live in the city of Palmetto, so I got a major sidewalk across the street from me. Kids are not walking in the roads anymore when you get into the city. Of course, they may spend more money than the county per capita. I don't know. But the bottom line is the money that's coming in been used for sidewalks and things like that, CDBG, comprehensive plan to sidewalk every part of the city of Palmetto. That's where I reside. So infrastructure is very important for me. If you're talking about curbing crime, you understand infrastructure is important for lighting and sidewalks. They go hand in hand with law enforcement. It protects the law enforcement and the citizen. They can look out a door. When it get dark, all the people come out selling drugs in certain communities, not all of them now. They're doing a great job cleaning up the community over there. Don't misunderstand me. But drive through there, and I offer again, when it get dark, meet me and let's ride through the community and see what you can see. You can't even see your hand.
Well, we can't meet you.
Okay. Well, let's hope all those folks are moving down here from the northeast part of the country where they pay a ton of money in taxes, and they come in here and demand that we raise their taxes. But I think we're going to hear from folks that probably will not say that.
Well,
so-
Madam Chair, it's not a fact of raising taxes, it's priorities. You know, I think the commissioner was correct. We selected priorities this year. Priorities may need to be infrastructure in the budget in a year. It has nothing to do with increasing taxes. We cannot use that as excuse that we have to increase taxes to help people in the community. We can't use that.
And just
Where are you gonna
the
get
five
it?
Those are
priorities
voters. Tell me,
that we laid out, I hear what you're saying, but, and we all know that when the different department heads come before us and present their budgets, they have their priorities for the different projects, the capital improvement projects in public works or whatever, the amount of money we spend for sidewalks every year, and that would be up to us after they do their presentations to say, okay, we need to put a little bit more in here. But when we put a little bit more over here, that means it's got to come from someplace else if we're not going to be increasing our millage rates. And
No.
we do not see,
That's a fact.
No commissioner should be on here arguing about whether we need sidewalks or lights. It's the basic quality of life.
oh, I'm not saying, I'm not arguing with you.
An issue.
I got the same thing in District 3.
Okay, well, we know that we've heard this been brought up. If there are things that we can juggle around to reprioritize, that's good. But we did set some priorities. Now it's time to hear from the public what their concerns are. And of course, we've got not a whole lot of detail here. There's going to be many more meetings. Hopefully, you all have the schedule. It's online, I believe, for the budget meetings, because we're going to be continuing them. But at this time, we've heard the budget message, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the public. I have a few people that have signed up to speak. First up was Glenn Gibellina. And you can come forward, and you will have 3 minutes.
I think he left.
Monthly.
Ian,
Oh, well, he'll be back.
there.
Glenn left.
Okay. So hopefully you've been listening. 3 minutes.
Glenn Jabalina, Mammoth Keith County resident, citizen. Transparency and accountability. This issue keeps coming up time and time again. I guess part of the problem that I have is that when I went to the agenda today, that's all it was just an agenda. There was no PowerPoint.
All of
All
us.
any of us got.
Well, that's unacceptable.
Well,
It's
we're okay with it.
I'm not.
I know.
I see him read
Sorry, I
page
can't
after page. I see PowerPoints up on the board, and it's not open to the public. How can we dissect any of the information we want to address if we have to digest it while we're listening to it? It's unacceptable, Mr. Hunsinger. The second thing I want to say is that we have, the highest constitutional officer sitting in this room, Mr. Stubbe, Sheriff Stubbe. Why doesn't he have time certain? Why doesn't he come up here, explain what he needs the $2 million for, and let me get back to his job? I mean, I don't get it. So that's the point on that. And the port, Mr. Hunsinger stated, there are no funds yet. I sent each and every one of you a 516-page report of the dysfunctional intergovernments between the school board, the port, the BOCC, the tax collector, and the tax appraiser. The fact of the matter is, no funds are going to be collected from the port, according to the tax appraiser. And I'm talking multi-million-dollar companies, Kintler Morgan, Del Monte, that used to pay us tens of thousands of dollars. We're not going to get any funds. So that's a dysfunction that I'm not real happy about. The healthcare, 6.9. That's 1.2% of our $550 million budget. That's well within range. And I think if we would have managed our money properly and more accountability in the past with the corpus, say when it was at $30 or $40 million, we could have put that in an interest-bearing account and had that 6.9 million forever. Now we're scrambling. So I think that the 6.9 is, if it push comes to shove, there's other places you can cut. Street lights, sidewalks. Mr. Smith, I can sympathize with you. My community, New Pierce, we've been waiting for street lights and sidewalks for 90 years. We've been paying taxes for 90 years. So I know where you're coming from, but I think we got a little more skin in the game than your neighborhoods. But the fact is, it's unacceptable. I believe every light, every street should be lit, should be sidewalks. In addition to our community, we have heavy trucks going on that. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Linda Neely? Oh, okay, well, she gets back before we end. She will get a chance to speak. If anybody else would like to come forward, I think that's all I had signed up. If you'd like to come forward, make any comments, just please state your name for the record, and you will be allowed 3 minutes at this time.
Thank you. Ernest Sandy Marshall, resident and second vice president of the Federation of Manatee County Community Associations. Sorry I wasn't here on time to hear the good words from our worthy county administrator. I always liked listening to his report. But I'm like Glenn. I want a copy of what you say so I can find out ways that I can critique that for you. But anyway, I just wanted to say a few words on behalf of the Federation. We have a committee set up. We're going to be participating in the workshops like we've done each year. We've got a proposal that we're putting together, some ideas to help you. And it sounds to me, from what I just heard briefly, that it's timely. So that's going to be coming to you, a copy to each one of you with different ideas, everything from infrastructure to funding for this, for that, and how to get our young people a place to live and be able to service affordable housing. So there's a lot of little things that we're working on. So we've got it just about together, and we're going to get it to you. So we look forward to seeing you at the workshops. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And just again to reiterate, none of us got anything before this meeting. I think you missed it, but almost every commissioner complained about that as well. So you're not alone in that. So I assume that will go on the website now that it is public, and before this meeting's done, we'll read off what the next opportunities are to address this. Ms. Neely?
Hi, I'm Linda Neely, a citizen of Manatee County. And, you know, I listened to Mr. Hunziker speaking, and I have a picture here, and it shows commercial freezers. I guess you can't see them, it's not big enough. But it's offering a 16 by 16 freezer for $32,000. Now, I know that Cisco delivers 6 days a week. I don't know who they're buying their frozen goods from, but a $2 million freezer? Are we like talking about building a freezer the size of this building? What are we talking about? I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around $2 million worth of freezer space when I have been in the restaurant business and they use walk-in freezers. You can also rent public storage freezers. But I mean, so I'd like us to really look at that data, you know. The second thing is I have here your impact fee schedule. And right now, the county's collecting $5,154 for a permit on a single-family home. Commercial entities are having to pay $7,796 already. You know, we want people to be able to afford homes, and we want people to bring their businesses here. So it will be interesting what your impact fee study says. Then secondly, I know that the school board, you all passed a resolution to suspend, and it said the word suspend, the school district's taxes in 09 to 11. Then in 11, they requested that you suspend them again. And it said in the language that they were to use the most recent study they had or do a new study. And yet they did not, you did not authorize the impact fees for the school board after 2013. But you did continue to collect the counties. So I think that we have a real disconnect between the county and the school. Why didn't somebody say, you know, that was when Tim McGonigal went out in September of 2012, and then Mr. Mills came in March of 2013. Why didn't somebody that's stabilized at the county level ask them, you know, we only suspended them, what do you want to do? And we would have been collecting impact fees for our schools. And then lastly, you're talking about this imaginary budget. You have not any real data except for the figure of possibly $550 million. But then it said that that's fluid because it might go up or go down. But I know that the port was assessed last in 2006 at $39 million. And they didn't pay ad valorem taxes, but will this year. You don't even know what that figure is. So we're kind of talking mythical unicorns here. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the board on this budget message work session? If you'd like to come forward.
I'll get it myself another.
Okay, looks like we're done with public comment. At this point, my agenda says we have commissioner comments, but do we have a wrap-up? I just had a list from the press announcement of all of the meetings. Were you planning on letting folks know? I can
Yes.
go through it if you want me to, because I do have it here.
Do we make
I'm
comment?
sorry, Carol, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I missed you.
I just have to say something. I heard Miss Neely in the back. If you haven't been to the jail, you don't understand what their freezers are. They save us tons of money by growing their own food, and they slaughter their own cattle, and I think they're still doing that. And you have no clue what kind of equipment. I'm glad you went on another site to see what a freezer costs, but they feed about 1,000 to 1,400 people a day. So, and we have to pay that as a county, not the sheriff. We pay the cost. So maybe when we get the specs for you, we'll be glad to share it with you. But I had to say something because I have been there. I've seen what their needs are. I've seen when their slaughterhouse, the freezers that their slaughterhouse is near. So in all due respect, just to make that analogy isn't fair. So, and I'm sure the sheriff will get us some information so we can give the public.
1,100.
1,100.
1,100, yeah.
Yeah, 1,100.
You said 11,000.
I'm sorry, 1,100 to 1,400 a day. That's what's in the jail now.
I was sitting there going, wow.
Commissioner DiSabatino.
Sorry.
Yeah.
He was really
knew-
busy.
We knew what you meant. And impact fees are only one time. So
Yes.
it's not like we charge it every year, so I just want to make sure the public understands that. And we did receive letters from Mr. Mills, correct? Of not to reinstate the
Yes.
impact fees while he was here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was at the request of the school board.
Yes.
The county acted at all times when the school board asked us. We've gone over that in
million.
quite a few meetings.
Doesn't matter.
But yeah, the question keeps coming up, and of course, there's a study underway for them to look at, and they have to make a decision. The school board has to make a decision how they want to fund their capital improvements. It's not up to this board to make that decision.
Okay. Also regarding those MSTUs, Palmer has one that we approve every year, and their infrastructure and their, looks great. The landscaping looks beautiful. And, I think moving forward, I think that's a mechanism and a tool that we can promote to the neighborhoods, because then they have skin in the game, and then they want to keep their streets clean, and they want to adopt a road and so forth. So I think everybody needs to have skin in the game. And I know where we live, along the new part of Tuttle. I'm trying to get the people to, do an MSTU there, because, it's just vacant piece of land. And then you hear from some citizens that could well afford it, but say, it's not my land, I don't own it, why should I have to pay? But, it's all a community, and it's all, if it's landscape, it looks nice, again, they have skin in the game, and then someone's not gonna be apt to do wheelies in the middle of it every time it rains, and, which makes me crazy every time it rains, so, yeah, method to my madness, yeah.
Okay,
The schedule?
the schedule, yeah. We go next.
On June 3rd, 1:30 to 5 p.m., we will be going over the fund summary. It's taking each of the individual funds, the major funds, and going through them for revenues and expenses and reserves and transfers. Again, that's June 3rd, 1:30 to 5 p.m. That'll be on the fourth floor. Then we'll begin a review of the decision units by program. That'll be starting June 8th at 1:30. Again, that's on the fourth floor. More decision units on June 9th, starting at 9 a.m. on the fourth floor. Then the Constitutional Officers Budget Review will begin on Wednesday, June 10th at 1:30 on the first floor here in the chambers. The Capital Improvement Program on Thursday, June 11th at 9 a.m. Again, that will be on the fourth floor. There's a budget public hearing for the public to come and comment on the proposed budget. That'll be June 11th starting at 6 p.m. here in the Commission chambers. And then on July 30th at 1:30 in this chambers will be a special meeting, the budget reconciliation and the adoption of the tentative millage rates. That's Thursday, July 30th. And that's the schedule. And then there's 2 public hearings in September. Those dates have not yet been established. Statutorily, the process works that the school board picks their dates first. We get to pick second, and then the cities pick after that. And so that process is yet to take place.
Madam Chair, can we make sure with the county, because I remember being in the cities and actually hearing in the last few years ago, cities are very anxious to know when we're doing it so they can set their dates. So if as soon as we get one, we can let them know, because they can't do anything until we do it.
And we can't do anything until the school
School
board
board
does
does
it.
it, I know.
Okay.
We will be in touch.
Thanks.
Okay, all right, well, I'm gonna go to citizen comments now. I got a couple, county commission comments, and I got a couple signed up. Commissioner DiSabatino?
No, I said mine, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Chappie?
Yeah, Ed, you did say the July 15th you will have your final budget presentation, correct? At least
July
I wrote that
15th,
down.
the board will be on recess. We will take any updates that we have adjustments to revenues,
appraisal.
and we will get the July 1 number. We will update everything and have it published and communicate it to the board, so that when you have your meeting on July 30th, you are well-versed and any changes and adjustments we've made to the budget, so that you can be prepared to make decisions on that date. Any items that you have flagged during the review process? Any grants that we receive, any updated information we get from the legislature?
Yeah.
All that stuff will be prepared and update so that you're ready to go on the 30th.
Okay. All right, any other commission comments at this time? Okay. Seeing none, then we are adjourned.